Let me first of all begin by introducing myself before I introduce the subject. My name is Amjad Bashar. I'm the Regional Director for the UN Disaster Risk Reduction Office in Africa. And I'm very, very pleased and honored to be with you today to maybe say a few words on what we're going to do today. We will be launching or actually using introducing the Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction, and specifically the special report on drought that was published for the first time by UNDRR and its partners in 2021. And this is one of a series of outreach events that we'll be doing around the world. We're using our own UNDRR regional offices in other regions of the globe. And the idea behind it really is to get a better understanding of drought, which is actually drought and its foundations and its causes and implications. And in Africa, this is for us quite an important issue. Those of us living in this continent must have gone across or come across drought situations. The situation we recognize that they're chronic, they're cyclical in nature, and there's a lot of challenges that have happened in Africa in the past, in the Horn, in the Sahel, and in the Southern Africa that some of you may be aware of. We're also hopefully we'll be looking at the direct and indirect impacts of droughts that are very, very complex to understand, particularly, and in terms of their socioeconomic implications, the systemic nature of how drought plays a role in the systemic nature of risk or contributes to it. We know that drought has environmental, climatic implications as well as implications for ecosystems, where there at the same time lie the solutions in these particular sectors. It also has implications for the populations that are quite serious. They can lead to displacement, they can lead to migration, both inside and displacement both in and out of the countries, and even rural to urban movements that often occur slowly in certain African countries, in many African countries. So as we, before I introduce my colleagues, just to highlight a couple of other issues. As I said, we'll be looking at the foundations of our understanding of drought, understand a little bit more from a case study from Madagascar on the impact of drought in Africa, and maybe touch upon risk reduction efforts and the way forward. So I'm really pleased to introduce the distinguished participants and panelists to this event. And I would like to begin with Dr. Roger Polwarty, who is the senior scientist at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, popularly known as NOAA, and Mr. Gerald Cairo, who is the regional program manager for the Global Water Partnership, GWP, in Eastern Africa. And I'm very honored actually to introduce my colleague, Mr. Issa Songo, who is the resident coordinator, United Nations resident coordinator in Madagascar. And I look forward to hearing some of his practical examples about how the day-to-day management of drought in Madagascar. My friend, Dr. Akia Babamaji, I'd like to welcome her as well. She is the Assistant Director and the Chief and the Head of the Natural Resource Management Division in the Department of Strategic Space Applications, Nigeria National Space Research and Development Agency, and she joins us from Abuja. Last but not least, let me introduce my colleague, Isabel Njia, and she will be moderating the session throughout the next hour. And I'll be very happy to give you, Isabel, the floor to take over from here. Thank you so much, my dear.
Thank you so much, Amjad. Indeed, it is a pleasure to be moderating this session. The discussion will be divided into three parts, and we'll start with part one on understanding drought. So let's just dive right into it. So I'll begin with Raja Pulwati, and to my knowledge, I know you're one of the 3 coordinating lead authors of this report. This may seem like a simple question, but I know the answer is not so simple. So let's start with, what is a drought, Roger?
So thank you, and thank you very much for having us. And thanks for the question, Isabel. So as we try to think about what drought is, and you'll pardon my little congestion, it's 6 a.m. in the morning. So for me, I'm going to read to you the Ipcc definition of drought, and I have been, a convening lead author on Ipcc. A period of abnormally dry weather long enough to cause a serious hydrologic imbalance. Now, within that term, as you pointed out, Isabel, has a lot of things. Abnormal by what measurement? Imbalance between what, and serious for whom and for what communities. So exactly as you're saying, the complexity of the question of drought is as complex as the climate system. It's not simply how do we respond. I'm from the Caribbean. How do we respond to a hurricane is not the same as how we respond to a drought. And so in that setting, drought has many time scales, as we know. It can last, from 3 months when you need peak rainfall to decades. It can cover areas, few square kilometers, to watersheds and entire regions. So the complexity makes it very difficult to measure. But there's something even more complex in drought, which is because of how long it takes to develop, the impacts are less visible. And by visible, I mean that gradually a household or food economies or a use of water begins to be used up, or vegetation begins to dry up. And so it is happening in a sense in the background in our day-to-day activities. And that is exactly one of the purposes of this report in the first chapter, is modernizing the view of drought. Around the world, many times we think it's only an agricultural impact, but as I was describing it, it filters through our economies, our livelihoods, and our ecosystems. So the idea here is to really get around the question of drought and to go to the different definitions of drought. Agricultural, meaning that do you have enough water for crop production? The amount of supply. Meteorological, is there enough precipitation during a certain period? Hydrological, is there enough water in the streams and the rivers and the groundwater? Ecological, what happens to the soil moisture? And then the most important, what all of those mean to socioeconomic drought, when water shortages affects the supply and demand for the things that we rely on, such as water, food, grains, fish, and even other activities such as tourism. So this effort in this report is to get at that complexity of the question of drought, and basically to come back to it and say, how do we respond? How do we anticipate? And how do we act on it, since there's no simple definition? Thanks, Isabel.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you for that definition indeed. Next, I'll go to Rakia Babamaji, and I'd like to ask you, could you give us a sense of some of the important trends that influence drought risk? Over to you, Rakia. Please mute yourself.
I'm okay. Okay, I'm okay. Thank you very much, Isabel, and I'm happy to be among the panelists, my colleagues that are joining here too, and then some of you that I work with in UN and AU. Thank you for inviting me. Drought risk is not just hazard happening to an area. Drought have social and political dimension and climate change. Climate change due to global warming is a world concern, particularly in Africa. Some of the important trends that influence drought risk are precipitation, land atmospheric temperature, evapotranspiration, and changes in sea surface temperature. Beside the above mentioned, other natural variability influence drought risk result from human-induced climate change, like the meteorological drought as evidenced in West Africa. This is most due to reduced precipitation, increased evapotranspiration, or the combination of two. So the sub-Saharan region, Africa, is identified as a drought hotspot global drought hazard is likely to increase with increasing global warming, according to Spinoni in the report. So the projection indicates that droughts are more frequently and more severe based on the prediction in the period of 1981 to 2010, which is more specific to Africa and other parts of the world. Figure 1.3 maps shows changes in meteorological drought frequency, and figure 1.4 also show average drought and severity of them in Africa and other parts of the world. And then I also was going through some of the work that has been done, and I know there was a study made by Mahara that's in 2016 shows that long-term trend of climate change and drought assessment in Horn of Africa, results shows that statistically, the trend of precipitation decreased insignificantly. The trend of temperature was observed to drop very significantly. So rainfall was uneven, inconsistent in frequency and amount. The trend of the annual average precipitation and anomaly declined significantly in 1930, from 1930 to 2014. So approximately 75%, especially in Horn of Africa, received inadequate rainfall. Approximately 89% in the region also has moderate to very high temperature, particularly in Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia. So the trend is something that we need to deal with. The impact is there, like was mentioned. So having this report is like providing a kind of a baseline and some solution that we can use to tackle this drought, especially in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakia. Before I let you go, could you please tell us more about the non-hazard drivers of drought? I'm interested to hear about that.
Yeah, that maybe is most of in terms of like food system as a result of drought, like land and soil management. For example, water management, which is indirectly has a problem as a result of drought. So for example, if you have a drought in an area and it affects a farmer, of course, it will also affect the population or the people that depend on the farmer, which you may think is non-hazard, but in actual sense, it also affects them. It's like a chain reaction from one step to the other. Yes. So energy system, changing drought, and so on are also example of the non-hazard drivers of the drought.
Thank you, Rakia. Thank you so much. Just to summarize before we move on to the next section, one of the interesting things that I have picked up so far is that the drought is very complex and therefore very hard to measure. And of course, the invisible impact of it as a result of how it starts and progresses. Just a reminder to our audience that we will try to answer as many questions today as possible. Please put in your questions in the Q&A box. And for the questions we will not be able to handle today, we'll definitely write to you. We will send the responses to you in writing. I would like to now move on to the second section, which is on drought impact. And I want us to turn our attention to the effects of drought, looking at both how drought can cause damage of the type that we're trying to, we are seeking to avoid as part of the Sendai framework implementation, but also its effects across systems and how it influences other hazards. So I'll start this section with a question to Gerald Cairo. Gerald, you are one of the contributors to this GAR special report on drought. What does it mean when we talk about the direct and indirect impact of drought, specifically for Africa?
Okay, thank you so much. Once again, my name is Gerald Cairo, and I work at the Global Water Partnership, and I've been part of the team in the IGAD region. IGAD region is the region, it's also called the Horn of Africa, which is really affected by the prolonged droughts. And I'm quite happy that I'm part of the the panelists in this particular event, and therefore I will share some of the key aspects, that is the direct and indirect impacts of drought. But also, before I do that, just to inform you that this region that I'm talking about, that's the Horn of Africa, is one which faces severe water constraints and prolonged droughts, the anomalies in seasonal rainfall and temperature due to climate change. And as a result, you find that there is overexploitation of natural resources by the stakeholders because of the condition in which they're so vulnerable that they are not able to afford some of the basic needs. And as a result, there are also conflicts in the region between especially the smallholder farmers and the pastoralists. So in terms of the impacts, one of the immediate impacts I wish to mention that is also highlighted in the report is impact on agriculture, which I'm sure you are well aware. By agriculture, you can disintegrate it into crops, livestock, and fisheries. Droughts affect food production systems, which of course causes crop losses. And as there are losses, there are hikes in food prices, which eventually has got other impacts. For example, kicking people, especially the rural communities, out of employment who are selling some of these products. So you find that it's a whole chain. Agriculture is affected, and it goes through the entire chain up to affecting the vulnerable people, that is mainly the women, the children, and also the elderly. Then secondly, I want also to mention something about the economic sectors in the countries in Africa, with specific reference to the countries in the GAR region. When you look at the key sectors of the economy in some of the Horn of Africa countries, by the way, when I talk about the Horn of Africa countries, I mean, I can give examples like Kenya, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Somalia, Uganda, and a few others. These countries, much of their economy relies on agriculture. So if there is a drought, definitely you know that the economic situation of that country is significantly affected. So one of the key sectors is the agriculture sector. The other sector is the water sector. There's a drop in groundwater. There's reduced quality and quantity of the water. So, and you know the impacts of the reduced quality of water, quality and quantity, other things will come in like diseases and so forth. Then look into the biodiversity sector. When there is a drought, there's habitat loss due to high temperatures, and that means the biology of the ecosystem is significantly affected. You'll not be able to receive most of these ecosystem functions. Look at tourism, which is one of the big earners in most of these countries also. A drought leads to reduction in wildlife and therefore reduction in foreign exchange. So directly impacting on the economy of the countries. Socially also, from the social sector, I mentioned about conflicts. There are things like hostilities, competition for water resources, all these kind of things. It's a web of so many challenges. So you can find that the impact of drought is really immense. And if we are not pragmatic in terms of supporting our people, both at community level, but even at policy level, there is need for a lot of sensitization so that even the policymakers are able to incorporate the key issues that can address or mitigate some of the mitigation. And lastly, I want to mention that one of the challenges that we have in the region is basically about responding to emergencies. I think we need to be proactive in drought management and plan in time. There are many early warning systems in place already, but there's no the action is a challenge. So that kind of feedback mechanism is quite important. So these are some of the key issues among many others that probably I've not mentioned that are coming out of the work we have been doing through the Integrated Drought Management Program in the Horn of Africa in collaboration with WMO and of course in support of institutions like NOAA. So thank you so much. And that's what I can contribute for now with regards to the impact, direct and indirect impacts of drought in the region. Up to you.
Gerald, before you leave the floor, could you please tell us what do you think are some of the particularities about the way droughts happen in Africa? What is that thing that is unique about how we experience drought here?
Yeah, thank you very much, Isabel, once again. Let me mention about some of the key institutions that are supporting with regards to drought or disasters. We have what we call Ipcc. Ipcc is IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center. It's an authority in climate predictions and weather forecasting. So they do trend analysis of some of these disasters like drought. When you look at the drought events in the countries, they have been happening in certain periods within space, within a particular space. And in a way, most of these countries have been affected. And the only way we can do this is to understand that drought is real and we need to prepare for it. So the trend is that it is always on. It comes on and off, and we must be aware of these kind of things and prepare appropriately. So we need to engage as many stakeholders from the technical point of view, but also others that can support in any way to ensure that we try to support our people in the region to manage or be resilient to some of these drought impacts, because now the trends are sort of known.
Thank you, Gerald. Thank you so much. I'll now move on to Rakia. And Rakia, could you tell us, in your experience, how do droughts connect to management of water resources and water quality?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, simple. When you want to answer this question, you just put it simple. Water and drought are connected. And so you will just say, when you are managing drought, of course, you have to think about water, because when there is drought, there's shortage in water. So the sustainable management of water resources in a drought-prone area like Africa is one of the challenges we are facing, both natural and man-made, confronting our society today. So human activity results from water scarcity and feedback in the climate system play a key role in drought intensification and propagation. Especially agriculture and the economic of the sub-Saharan Africa are highly sensitive to climate variability. So drought have occurred throughout the history. And just as that occurred, there's a problem with water. Due to the natural climate variability, most of the important natural factors contributing to malnutrition for men in many parts of the region is also connected with water, lack of water. So the overall impact of drought in a given country or in African region result to social, economic, environmental impact, depending on several factors, such as managing the resources or the capacity, or having the technology to cope with increasing drought issues in the continent. So there is an urgent need to reduce the vulnerability of country across sub-Saharan, especially to the climate variability and to the threats posed by the climate change by using integrated system approach. So for example, I know there are so many programs, and the last speaker has also mentioned some of the things that has been happening around in Africa. One of it is the 2016 Wind Zone Declaration, which enhanced the resilient and drought preparation for Africa. Talk about 6 principles, which is related to drought policy and governance. And this involve monitoring, early warning, drought vulnerability, impact, drought mitigation, and preparedness responses, and so on. And as well as in West Africa, which this conference, I was also part of it in 2018. There was international conference on Lake Chad, and the most important is also talking about reviving the basin ecosystem for sustainable livelihood, because that's one of the areas that climate has been impacting, that we're seeing the evidence of climate change, the Lake Chad basin. So managing drought definitely is connected with water. So when you are thinking about managing or planning or having a strategy that involves drought management, you have to take into consideration also the scarcity of water, the impact it has on water, and vis-a-vis the population or the society that lay on the water. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakia. Thank you so much. I'd like to now take this opportunity to, with pleasure, bring on board Issa Sanogo, who is the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Madagascar. And to you, Issa, could you please reflect on your experience in the context of drought in the region? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I'm very pleased to join you on this occasion. I think the challenge of the climate change is what brings us together today. And you might have seen it. Madagascar is in the headlines for quite several months now, not because of it's known as the fourth most affected country in the world by climate change, but also because of the drought-driven humanitarian crisis in the southern part of the country. And reading through the news, I think many qualify the situation as the first climate change induced drought that has brought many people to the brink of famine. I'm not telling you anything you don't know about. That says how relevant the GAR report on drought is to our context, and it's also relevant to our action and this even this outreach event. And I would really want to give you the example of Madagascar by starting by highlighting how the current drought is playing in the life of people in terms of impact. And then I'll follow up by what I see as opportunities to move from risk to resilience, and conclude by a call to action. So let me start with the overview. I think as you all know, in Madagascar, there has always been drought in the south of the country, which is an area where we find semi-arid climate and a progressive significant desertification, which is even reaching 99% in some areas. But the situation is clearly deteriorating due to climate change, especially since 2019. The delay of the rains has caused crop failures in arid areas in the great south of Madagascar, which is, by the way, populated by almost 14% of the entire population of the country. This part of the island has suffered 2 successive years of extreme drought. Currently, nearly 1.35 million people are food insecure and require emergency food assistance. Over 135,000 children under 5 suffer from acute malnutrition, also requiring urgent humanitarian assistance. The humanitarian crisis we are facing here in the South, I would say, is partly attributable to a development failure, but it has been exacerbated by the drought as well as the COVID lately. But let me say that drought doesn't happen overnight, it builds up. The GAR report mentioned somewhere flash droughts. This is not the case in Madagascar. Here, droughts are slowly developing, climate-induced, and there are structural hazards. We are in a situation of a chronic drought with its cyclical humanitarian crisis and a rising frequency of occurrence. A recurrent drought in the region causes chronic water shortages for multi-purpose use in at least 8 districts out of 16 in the south. The frequency and severity of drought episodes have exhausted the remaining coping mechanism of the population. The seasonal jobs upon which many families rely to get through the lean season, for instance, are no longer there. We are seeing acute and chronic malnutrition of children coupled with micronutrient deficiencies. The increase in the dropouts from schools, the very low rate of access to drinking water, and coupled with galloping demography, illiteracy rate, early marriages, gender-based violence, which are all, to me, signs of increasing vulnerability in the Great South. Now, I was also reading somewhere about the implications on security. You may wonder if drought creates conflict or social unrest in Madagascar. I think this is one of the core issues of concern of the GAR report, that for now we haven't seen any credible evidence on the ground here, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist and may not occur. I think we need to closely monitor 3 things that we are seeing here. Firstly, migration is becoming a major threat to environment. Families are migrating either to cities or to the northern part of the country in environmentally protected areas where they rely on nature for survival. This is resulting in anthropic pressure with environmental consequences and potentially social impact. Secondly, migration patterns are changing from seasonal migration of men to migration of entire families. While the drought is becoming more and more severe and frequent, entire families are migrating away from the land that is believed to be the land of their ancestors. The social and cultural impact on communities being outrooted in this way needs to be closely studied. And thirdly, the potential of security threat and social instability cannot be ruled out. There is a phenomenon that you all may have heard of. The Dalo phenomenon is something here which started culturally as a cattle raiding practice. This traditional practice is becoming more and more organized in criminal practices in the drought-affected areas. We don't have a statistical correlation, but it may as well be a recent phenomenon that we need to keep an eye on. Now, what is the perspective, as I was saying in my outline? Where are we? Are we moving toward resilience? I would like to quote the GAR report, which says, and I quote, "A drought becomes hazardous when water demands are no longer met. It becomes a risk when the drought hazard affects exposed and vulnerable societies and ecosystems with inadequate capacity to cope with the lack of water. Failure to manage this risk can result in dangerous consequences in lives, livelihoods, and the economy and ecosystems." I think we are right into a similar situation here, with urgent humanitarian needs to be met, and we want to manage the risk now before it's too late. Madagascar once used to be a pioneer in many ways in disaster risk management. For instance, in the late 90s, it used to have a good early warning system that was functioning for 15 years. 10 years back, Madagascar was one of the first countries in the world to have a national plan for climate change. In 2012, Madagascar had its first contingency plan with clearly defined actions to act when necessary. Unfortunately, we have shifted from that early warning approach, the prevention approach, to reaction and response, which to me is a setback. We want to reactivate these existing risk management tools, upgrade them if necessary, and mobilize the resources, including through the national budget. To me, the good news is that we can build on those existing experiences to reactivate the systems, and here is why. In July, when I went to the field, from a people perspective, I saw the real impact of climate change on people who are suffering from the dire consequences of a crisis that they did nothing to create. However, I was very encouraged by the fact that they are ready to deal with this challenge. It all needs that we immediately assist them to alleviate their current situation. They also need our midterm support to start standing on their feet. Now, the second aspect, which to me is a good news, is from the government side. Currently, there is a strong will from the government to invest in resilience and development in the South more than ever. There is a push for the UN to align to this expressed orientation, and the government is taking steps to voice it more and more. For instance, during the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, organized by this government in the South, they mentioned it and they called upon us. They just launched the Disaster Risk Reduction platform yesterday, and they also asked for the cadre assessment. From the UN side, we've augmented our capacity, and I'm not going to go into many details here, but now we have UNDRR in our UN city, we have UNEP, and we have UNODC. We benefited from training from UNDRR to the UN city members so that DRR becomes an integral part of our programming approach. And we hope that with the Nexus group, which is also in place, we can factor in the Nexus approach to make sure that we are working together in convergence zones that we have also started to assess so that we can tackle these issues in the South. And finally, Madagascar is also very much on the international agenda with the COP26. The head of state with a big crowd is going to Glasgow. But I think the success of the COP26 will be gauged by its capacity to bring practical and effective solutions to Madagascar. So let me now conclude by saying that when you look at the hashtag of the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, it says it clearly that this is only together we will make it, that we will make it. I think we need to operationalize this commitment of thinking and acting out of the box and refrain from waiting to go back to business as usual. It is essential that we work together jointly with the government to demonstrate our value addition and truly build ownership because the government wants it. We need to align ourselves with the government's emergency priorities and find a path toward DRR, resilience, and peace. And I think we need to have this type of events more often because it's an opportunity for us to have effective South-South cooperation, cross-learning, and cross-fertilization ideas. And we need also, as Madagascar, to gain more perspective about drought risk management. And therefore, we propose to have a working session with the GAR report writers so that we can discuss, question, brainstorm, and ground all those good findings of the report into Madagascar's reality. I want to end by saying that the special advisor to the SG on DRR mentioned something on Twitter which caught my attention, and I want to quote it. She said, "Development without DRR is like building a car and deciding not to install the brakes. Let us not wait until the car crashes to make that extra investment. We have crashed, but we can recover, and we must. We owe it to the people of the south of Madagascar." Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Isa. I really enjoyed listening to your reflections and learning from your experience. Indeed, the experience is very rich, and there's so much that we as practitioners can learn from, from tapping into your knowledge. Indeed, it is not business as usual, but together we can. So far we have spoken a lot about drought impact. And in the second half of this discussion, we would turn to risk reduction and hear from the audience in the Q&A. So please keep your questions coming. So for this next part, we'll be talking to, again, we'll do a round of questions to the panelists of the day. And I'll start with Roger and Gerald to see if we can unpack a little bit this term that has been thrown about, the systemic nature of risk. It is a strong theme in the report, and indeed even in the GAR 2019, and generally in UNDRR's language. So to Roger first. The report summarizes a few major recommendations to connect knowing. Can you outline 2 or 3 main points on this?
Yes, thank you very much, Isabel. So one of the things that we try to emphasize in the report is that we know a lot. It's not simply saying we are starting from scratch, as you heard from definitely from Issa and from everyone else. There's a lot of experience. I work very closely with the Famine Early Warning System Network in the Horn of Africa. I was just in Nairobi 2 weeks ago, and I know the failure of the long rains and what that could have meant if things had gotten worse right now. As we think about how we draw from the report, we talked about modernizing the view of drought. We talked about the issue of traditional approaches and what we learn from how people are living with drought day to day, and then what it means in the long term. But the systemic aspects are where the challenges are becoming more complex. Given the changes, as you heard from Rakia and others about drivers and evapotranspiration, and then the issues that we heard about governance, it becomes very, very important for us to learn explicitly from what we already know. So if we think about what causes land degradation and habitat loss, there's land cover change, the hydrologic deficit from things we are withdrawing from the system, poor soil quality. But then on the positive side, we understand already the value of water conservation, of maintaining soil quality, of maintaining ecosystem health. So one of the things that this report really emphasizes, and and the rich discussion from Issa and others exposes this, is that we need to develop a shared vision of the fact that our risks, even though implementation is local, they're driven by global systems, regional mechanisms, and then down to the local. Our risks are globally networked in the world right now. We are connected through Wi-Fi, but we're also connected through commodities, through the movement of virtual water. So things that happen in places far away from where we live also affect our food security. So a rich part of this report is to say, how do we move, exactly as was being said, towards resilience, where we are trying to make sure that new risks and new impacts are not created for local people and they can achieve the things that they're after. So the report talks very explicitly about how to promote the vertical coordination between the international mechanisms, Sendai, Paris, Aichi biodiversity targets, and the Sustainable Development Goals, and then how we align financing and funding down to the local level. But nothing is more important than the engagement at the local level, as we all know. So as was just being described, the report has a couple key messages. We have to do more with what we already know. No two droughts are the same. We need to develop a shared vision of this systemic view of risk. The drought is just not something you return back to conditions of vulnerability. And we need to listen to people and their stories. And so from that standpoint, we have an entire section in the report on advancing, not just what we ought to do, but how we make the transitions financially, culturally, psychologically, socially in different parts of the world. And the cases try to pull those out. It is very clear that the way we are doing, as was just said, business as usual, is being overwhelmed by these global risks and by local imbalances, whether it's through conflict or other aspects. So we talk explicitly about how to leverage data and information, how to set some rules for water agriculture for transitions, and really how to implement at the local level in terms of habitats, industry, buildings, and public spaces. So I think there's recognizing that our ways of knowing, there's an old saying, that uncertainty is not just what you don't know, it's what you think you know that is not so. And what we are trying to learn is how we move our societies and our communities forward in this new and changing world to promote the governance for key local systems and issues. And the report talks very much about that. If we think of the three pillars of drought, monitoring and early warning, vulnerability and impact assessment, mitigation, preparedness, and response, the last one is the most contentious. That's where the politics come in. That's where our decision-making or culture or practices come in. And that's the one that needs the most attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you. I particularly like the emphasis on local action because I have a special place for local action. I'll move now to Gerald. Gerald, the recommendations related to adaptive drought risk management and governance sound very interesting. Could you describe a few possibilities that could be linked to what we have discussed today?
Yes, once again, thank you very much. And I'll add my voice to what Roger has just mentioned. When you talk about adaptive risk management and governance, it is very critical. And already the report is very clear on a number of issues. The first I'll mention is the need to promote investments in early warning systems. Early warning that triggers early action saves loss of human life and economic damage. So that is extremely very important. Then of course, the other thing is strengthening the capacities of the key stakeholders at all levels, regional, national, and community level. There must be a bridge. Later I'll be mentioning bridging the gap between policy and practice. But before that, let me just emphasize the point of strengthening the capacities of the key stakeholders. This is very important because as you may know, if you know the capacity gaps and priorities, then you can design tools that could support in strengthening the capacities of the stakeholders. Then another point I would like to mention is the need for governments to support innovative drought adaptation actions. That is also the point you have just mentioned, the local actions. That is very important. And with this, we need to sort of set up concrete adaptation actions that focus on innovative, scalable drought actions. I'll give some examples, and these are coming from the Horn of Africa countries where we have worked and we are still working. For example, establishment or the construction of modified rainwater harvesting structures, water storage. These are actions now on the ground that are going to support the people who are most affected. Things like water ponds, mini irrigation systems that support crops during water stress, and restoration of degraded catchments. These are some of the things that we need to think about. Then the other point is on knowledge management and information sharing. raising awareness, communication, and again, capacity building, packaging the information. How do we package this information and to who? Is it the policy, the policy people? Is it the implementers? Is it the recipients, the vulnerable people? So all these aspects that we can think when we talk about adaptive risk management as well as governance. Then another issue, which I can highlight quickly, is at multi-scale level, multi-scale governance. At the regional level, for example, IGAD, which is the Regional Economic Commission, they are regional frameworks which have been agreed upon by the countries in the region. For example, there is the IGAD Idrisi in the Horn of Africa. The Idris is the IGAD Drought Disaster Resilience and Sustainability Initiative. This is very important because each of the countries has got a focal point, and you can see messages coming from the Idrisi, coming to the countries. There's sort of feedback from the region to the countries and back. For me, I think that is very important because in a way it is solving issues collectively, and moreover, supporting when it comes to sharing some of the good practices with regards to drought management at all scales. Then my last point is about financing information services. There is inadequate communication services in the region, and we need to finance dissemination of this information. We need feedback. We need to introduce things like help desks to support the different stakeholders there's a lot of knowledge out there from different experts, but how does it reach the people who need this kind of information? We need to bridge this gap. So we need to support information services. Then again, lastly, is about how do we ensure that there is community participation and engagement in some of these drought-related kind of interventions? How do we make the connection between policy and practice? How do we bridge the gap? I mean, there are policies, there are plans. Sudan, the other day, has developed a national drought plan. Ethiopia has also developed one. These are plans read by people who are technocrats. How about the vulnerable people? How do we make the linkage? How do we popularize some of these drought frameworks, the plans and strategies, so that they're understood by our people, for them to be able to now actively participate, and maybe in that way, we shall support in making them more resilient to droughts. Thank you very much, Isabel. Back to you.
Thank you, Gerald, and for the energy that you've put in those recommendations. Thank you very much. I'd now like to move back to Isa Sanogo. And to you, Isa, could you please paint a picture for us of what you think the biggest challenges are in our institutions today? In the case of Madagascar, for example, and what would be the easiest and hardest elements to achieve to reach the point where we have, robust drought risk management institutions?
Thank you again, Isabel. I think if you ask me what the challenges are for the UN to become risk management institutions, I would turn the question around and reformulate it and ask what some necessary elements for the UN are to become a risk management institution. This is because I think the UN needs to become a risk management institution to accomplish its mandate and deliver the development promises for the 2030 agenda. We often say about countries that we need them to show political will. And sometimes we tend to criticize them for not having that political will for effective disaster risk management. And I think the will is also on our side as UN. From what I'm seeing here, and that's why I said the situation is a development failure, and many institutions that we have helped to put in place have been forgotten, and we are now in a reaction mode. To me, disaster risk reduction, drought risk management has still a lot of room for improvement. It is often more a mix of reluctance to do business differently, and I said it before, sometimes we are so much in a rush lack of time, and expertise as well. And again, we are losing a lot of expertise, and we are being challenged by non-UN agencies to claim our terrain back. I think it all boils down to vision and understanding. We are working in very difficult contexts, and we keep not trying to change, and we want to achieve transformational results. We need to ask ourselves if that is the right way to go. As a resident coordinator in Madagascar, together with the UN city, I think we are taking that risk. It's not easy, don't get me wrong, to put risk management at the heart of our development and humanitarian action. The risk I'm facing is, while pushing for the change, probably the containers are still the same. So the content may be changing, but so long as the containers remain the same, we have a big challenge. We also need customized training to technical leaders within our agencies, as we had recently received from UNDRR on integrating DRR and climate change adaptation in our cooperation framework. Things like basic concepts, concrete examples, and practical exercises were, in my understanding, very useful. And this sort of enables to demystify the DRR and to empower project designers and implementers to integrate it across the board from the start. We are going to continue this approach by having half-day workshops with different agencies to ground DRR, as I said, into what we are doing on in our day-to-day programming. And I was also thinking, I mean, we have gender, which is not questioned anymore as a compulsory element in our programming. Why not DRR? Why not disaster risk management to become as well compulsory? We know that crises will happen, and every time, even more frequently due to climate change. So I would say we should try and integrate the feature of the crisis into our strategies so that we can design programs that have a chance to be sustained in the long run. That's where I would stop, and thank you very much.
Indeed, thank you so much, Isa. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time of your busy schedule to just spend this hour with us. Bringing this session to a close, I'd now hand over the floor to my colleague, Adam Fish, who has been behind to take us through the question and answer session. So over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, everybody. This has been most interesting. We have a very short amount of time, and a couple of questions have come up. One of them, I guess the first one would be for Rakia, although others could answer as well. What technology or tools do you think we could look forward to in the next 20 years that would help us that would change the way we manage drought or understand drought?
Okay, thank you very much. Being a technology and a scientist and a geospatial scientist, by the way, I think in the next 20 years or even now, so what we have is artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, cloud, satellite technology. For example, when you talk about the three pillars of managing drought, you have preparedness, monitoring, warning, forecasting, and so on. So you need geospatial technology and artificial intelligence, especially to depict thematic map that shows land changes at certain time, at certain period, through spatial and temporal scale. You need it to identify the nature of change, measuring the extent of change, assessing the pattern of change so that you can prefer solution to this problem of drought that we have. Then I can say that I want to encourage or say it loud. It's not just about government, it's not about financing, it's about having the capacity in this continent, Africa, that to use the technology that is available. So we need capacity building, we need the people to be introduced and awareness to be created about this technology, especially artificial intelligence and geospatial aspect of it. So with that, we can do a lot of bilateral program, connect with other people that are advanced, like other countries that are advanced in using those technology, and we can learn from them. We can also adopt, and they can help us to work around it so that we can achieve sustainable management of drought using available technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rakia. And actually, Gerald mentioned a couple of examples of countries that are doing particularly well, particularly interesting work in policy side. Gerald or Rakia, I guess, the next question then would be, aside from the policy side, and actually maybe Isa as well, you would have an input on this one. Are there any countries in Africa that you think are doing particularly well in practice, in interventions in managing drought risk?
Well, I can specifically talk about West Africa. For example, in West Africa, we have a drought center. For the last 3 years now, they have been doing things on involving local people, national people, creating awareness on how to manage the resources within that region. And at the same time, we have ECOWAS early warning system, which vis-a-vis more or less deal with the indirect impact of drought, which is conflict resulting from drought situation within in fact, I can categorically say they have the best early warning system presently in the continent, because they have been working and managing. Also, we have so many organizations like Lake Chad Basin Commission. They have been doing well also in managing the crisis in the Lake Chad region. And at the same time, in my own country, in Nigeria, we have also been doing integrated approach by Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Science and Technology are working together also to prefer a solution for combating climate change that will result into drought. So that, yes, we are doing well for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakia. The last question, maybe if we can do even 1 minute, this would be maybe more for Roger and or Isa, and probably we have time for both. What kind of barriers do you see there are to the intersectoral management of drought that you have noted are needed? Both, Isa, you gave many examples of the effects, for example, of drought on health systems, on migration, on gender. If it has effects across sectors, then the solution must be across sectors as well. Have you seen, have you noticed what the barriers would be or what the obstacles would be to having good intersectoral management? Likewise to you, Roger. Over.
Thank you. Rogers, maybe.
Please go ahead, Isa.
Yeah. No, just to say very quickly, as I said before, Madagascar used to be, if I were to answer to the first question before this one, I would have said Madagascar used to be the place to go because 10 to 15 years ago, things were going really well. Like Rukaya said, all these things used to exist. And for reasons that I don't know, I think we've gone from prevention and early warning to reaction, unfortunately. One of the things I observed is that the resourcing dwindled down from the government, because at some point when all these things were built up, there were conditions that the government would commit to take it forward. As soon as the international support was phased out, it was forgotten. And that's one aspect. The second aspect is really on the coordination. I think on the ground, I am afraid to say it, and this has become my battle, we need to seriously coordinate in a way that the multi-sectoral part is not creating unnecessary redundancies that are undermining our own capacity to add value. And we are now being criticized for it. I mean, the government is now even in a better position to start pointing fingers at us because of our own lack of multi-sectoral coordination. And I think it's something I would call for very seriously, and let people come in with their own comparative advantage so that we can team up to make a difference and not walking on each other's toes. Thank you.
So, thank you, Adam. I mean, Issa addressed precisely the question in that our calls for coordination have been there for a long time, but in fact, there are barriers to doing that. So asking one more time for coordination is actually not going to get us anywhere unless we look at what stops us. If we've known this, as one of my mentors used to say, if we know so much, why aren't we doing better? I think within the report, we try to get very much as what does it take to create a national view for drought resilience, not just early warning, but early warning is part of resilience that feeds into the goals of all of the other agencies. And what I mean by that is, rather than saying, well, let's create one integrated group, which I've actually created the National Integrated Drought Information System for the US and for early warning across areas like the Caribbean, we have to ask, how does addressing the issue of drought underwrite the public good goals of water, energy, health, food, biodiversity, and coast? Now, as you heard from Rakia, you definitely heard in the among Gerald, Isabel, and others, there's an issue of capacity. As we look at how best we should coordinate, there are nodes in which failure occurs, and this is everywhere. So we have to ask the question, who is to do it? What is the new training? And we talk about this in the report. Not just how do we train people better to use climate models or satellite data, or even how to do the impacts assessment, but more, how is the system functioning? Where are the nodes of failure in the flow of information and financing from the national to the local level? As was just said, local is the most important levels. And then we actually say, okay, good, you guys, you handle it without extra funding, without extra guidance, and so on. And we talk about that in the report. So to me, the barriers are that the autonomy of different groups in different ministries, their role is to achieve the goals of what they're asked to do. But to work on an integrated problem, such as climate or drought, requires the alignment that you were just asking. And we're trying to do that at the global level on those SDGs and Paris and Sendai. But then really at the national level, developing the drought resilience partnerships that work to ensure a seamless link with public, private, and civil society. But the most critical missing capacity or capability are new individuals, newly trained, working with people like Issa and others on where they see the gaps to this working as an integrated information system. So I think the idea of having people to help the system, to help drought risk and resilience management be seamless requires a new way of looking at who we need. And I think this is a partnership with academia and others we need to work out. More of the same isn't going to help us. And so in addition, we have to show that by addressing drought, we are addressing public good goals in other areas such as water, energy, food, and so on. Otherwise, we then will always be reactive. Thanks.
That is an excellent closing note. Thanks, Roger. I really appreciate that. I think that's all we've got in the questions right now. I'll hand back to you, Isabel. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Indeed, I mean, the questions are quite interesting, and the discussion is even more interesting to listen to. I think I'll just invite Amjad to give some closing remarks. It's been a pleasure moderating this session, and on my own behalf, because Amjad will speak on the behalf of UNDRR. Thank you in advance to the contributors of the GAR before I meet them. And of course, to the speakers of this day that made it possible, and to each of you for joining. Let's keep in touch after this session. Amjad, over to you.
Thank you, Isabel, very much. We've gone over time, so just a couple of words of thanks to everybody, and just to say how much I've learned in terms of trying to understand this complex drought phenomenon that has so many implications, and it seems that there is no one factor to blame. It seems that we have just underlines the reason, the need for us to work together multi-sectorally and across institutions. And in Africa, I think we have to remember as well, that the population, most of the population relies on agriculture. So when drought comes and affects it, not only does it affect the human population itself, but as Gerald said, it also affects issues related to foreign exchange and all kinds of issues that have a socioeconomic impact. I was very interested also in a lot of the language that was used, particularly practical information that Isa provided on the 3 points that he made on the migration and 2 elements related to migrations. And I was really struck by the social impact and the fact that cultural losses take place. People lose their historical heritage because of that, and of course the security threat that drought has brought about, and the cattle raiding, which is an experience we've had in the Sahel region and from Darfur to elsewhere. So I thought it was really good. But one last thing I wanted to say is that I think as contributors to the GAR report, you have an offer from the resident coordinator of Madagascar to apply the GAR report in Madagascar and turn it into a practical practical use. So I do encourage my colleagues in UNDR who are behind this report, as well as the contributors, to take up this offer and support Madagascar and turn this GAR report into to provide benefit to the Madagascar situation of drought there. So thank you very much. I do agree, of course, that development has to be risk informed, and also that risk reduction, we always suffer. It doesn't have the same CNN effect that response has, and I think that has a lot to do with it. Our role with the media and to promote advocacy of this is quite important. Just one last word, just to tell everybody that from the 16th to the 19th of November, there will be the regional platform for disaster risk reduction. And I really encourage all of you to participate in that, and we'll be in contact with you separately to maybe discuss some sort of contribution that you would be willing to make at the regional platform. So far, we have about 250 people already registered. And at the end of the day, we hope to have a declaration and outcome document that will reflect disaster risk reduction challenges and also indicate commitments for disaster risk reduction that can be adopted at the end of the conference, and eventually by heads of state at the African Union Summit in January. So we hopefully get some political buy-in, raise awareness at the political level, at the African continental level. So I look forward to engaging with you in that. And I just have to give my heartfelt warm thanks to Gerald, Rakia, Roger, and Isa. And of course to you, Isabel and Adam behind the scene, and the other colleagues in the UNDR Geneva. Thank you so much for spending your Friday afternoon with us. It's a privilege and an honor. Enjoy the rest of the weekend, the rest of the day and the weekend.
And thank you, Amjad.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.